Welcome back to XRP Insider Network, your home for the real signals, the overlooked narratives, and the moves happening before the headlines catch up. If you believe crypto isn't just about price, but about positioning, power, and timing, you're in the right place. Go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next. Now, let me ask you something. What if the biggest thing happening to XRP right now has absolutely nothing to do with today's price? Because what Brad Garlinghouse just confirmed isn't about a pump, it's not about a breakout candle, and it's definitely not about short term hype. This is about 2026. And once you understand what's being quietly set up, you'll realize why this moment is far bigger than most people realize. Look, here's the thing: markets don't reward the loud, they reward the positioned. And while retail is still arguing over charts and influencers are chasing engagement, Ripple has been playing a completely different game. Brad Garlinghouse didn't come out and scream XRP to the moon. He didn't promise a price target. He did something far more important. He confirmed direction, and direction is what institutions care about. Let's break this down carefully because if you miss the nuance here, you'll completely miss the opportunity. Over the past several months, Brad has been increasingly vocal about Ripple's long term strategy. Not next quarter, not next year, but the infrastructure cycle that completes around 2026. That's not a random year. 2026 aligns with multiple global transitions happening simultaneously: regulatory clarity cycles, central bank digital currency pilot expansions, tokenized asset frameworks moving from testing into production. And Ripple is positioned directly in the middle of all of it. Here's where it gets interesting. Brad recently emphasized that Ripple is no longer focused on proving that blockchain works. That phase is over. Now it's about integration. That single word changes everything. Integration means banks aren't asking if anymore, they're asking how. Integration means XRP isn't being marketed as a speculative asset, but as a functional liquidity layer. Integration means the rails are being laid quietly while the public is distracted by price volatility. And this is where 2026 comes into focus. Ripple's partnerships are no longer experimental, they're operational. We're talking about corridors being tested today that are designed to scale tomorrow. We're talking about institutions that don't move fast, but when they move with size. Brad confirmed that Ripple's role is expanding beyond cross border payments, tokenized real world assets, settlement layers for financial institutions, interoperability between legacy systems and digital rails. That's not hype, that's infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't show up on a 15-minute chart. This is why people get shaken out early. They're watching price, while Ripple is watching policy, adoption, and system alignment. Let me say this clearly: XRP does not need retail excitement to succeed. That might be uncomfortable to hear, but it's the truth. Retail follows institutions, not the other way around. Brad's confirmation wasn't about making headlines, it was about signaling readiness: readiness for regulatory clarity, readiness for scale, readiness for a financial system that is actively searching for efficiency. And guess what happens when the system finds something that works? It standardizes it. That's the 2026 setup. Not a price explosion out of nowhere, but a gradual locking in of XRP's role before the crowd realizes what happened. This is the same pattern we've seen with every major infrastructure shift in history: railroads, the internet, cloud computing. The money was made by those who understood positioning before visibility, and XRP right now is in the positioning phase. If this is already clicking for you, take a second to like the video and stay subscribed, because what we're about to get into next is where most people completely underestimate what's coming. We're going to talk about why Ripple doesn't need permission anymore, why regulatory pressure actually accelerated this setup, and why XRP's real value proposition may not fully reveal itself until it's already embedded in the system. And once that happens, price becomes a lagging indicator. All right, so let's go deeper, because this is where the story really separates believers from spectators. One of the biggest misunderstandings in crypto is the idea that regulation kills innovation. In reality, regulation filters it. And Ripple didn't fight regulation to escape it, they fought it to define it. That distinction matters. Brad Garlinghouse has been extremely clear about this over time. Ripple wanted clarity not for XRP holders, but for institutions that cannot operate in uncertainty. Banks don't speculate, they allocate, and they only allocate once the rules are written. That's why the legal pressure Ripple faced didn't slow them down. It forced them to harden their strategy. While other projects were building narratives, Ripple was building compliance ready infrastructure. Now, think about 2026 again. By that point, multiple jurisdictions are expected to have fully defined digital asset frameworks. Tokenization of securities moves from pilot programs into mainstream usage. Liquidity demands increase as markets become more global and more real time. This is exactly where XRP fits, not as a brand, not as a meme, but as a neutral bridge asset that doesn't compete with national currencies, doesn't replace banks, and doesn't threaten existing power structures. That's why it's allowed into the room. Brad has essentially confirmed that Ripple's conversations today are not about trying crypto, they're about scaling it responsibly, and that's a massive shift. Here's another piece most people miss. Ripple doesn't need XRP to be understood by the public to be used by institutions. That's uncomfortable for YouTube, it's uncomfortable for social media, but it's how the real world works. When Swift moves trillions, most people don't know how it works, they just know it's there. That's the direction XRP is moving toward. Invisible utility, massive throughput. And once something reaches that level, it becomes very difficult to replace. This is why Brad's 2026 confirmation matters so much. It tells us Ripple is no longer asking, will this work? They're asking, how big does this get? And that's where the price conversation changes, because price doesn't lead adoption. Adoption compresses supply. XRP has a fixed supply. Liquidity demand increases as usage increases. That's basic economics, not speculation. But the market won't price that in early. It never does. It prices it in late, fast, and emotionally. That's why this phase feels boring to some people. That's why impatience shakes people out. And that's why long term positioning feels lonely before it feels smart. Brad didn't confirm a date for price movement, he confirmed a timeline for readiness. And that's the signal serious players watch. So when you hear 2026, don't think countdown, think convergence. Regulation converging with technology, institutions converging with blockchain, liquidity converging with efficiency. XRP sits at that intersection. And once the system locks in a solution, it rarely goes backward. This is why the narrative XRP is dead never made sense. Dead assets don't get this much institutional attention. Dead networks don't keep expanding partnerships quietly. They fade. XRP hasn't faded, it's matured, and maturity doesn't look exciting until suddenly it looks unstoppable. So if you're still here watching price every day zoom out, this isn't a trade, it's a positioning cycle. And Brad Garlinghouse just confirmed that the groundwork is being finalized, not for headlines, but for permanence. If you understand that, you're already ahead of most of the market. Make sure you stay connected with XRP Insider Network because as this 2026 setup continues to unfold, the signals will get quieter, but the implications will get much bigger. And when the world finally notices what XRP has become, it won't ask how it happened. It'll ask how it missed it